There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories that change your breath. This one will change the way you walk through the world. Tonight on The Modern Mystic, we enter the quiet brilliance of the Stoics' guide Seneca on rest and resilience, not as a figure in history, but as a mirror to something ancient within you. Have you ever felt the slow ache of wanting more space, more calm, more stillness, within a heart that beats so loud with living? Maybe there was a time, a night when rest flickered just out of reach. Maybe you've wondered how anyone, in a world so full of storms and lists and longing, could step quietly into peace. Seneca once felt that too. Long before the world carved his name in books and scrolls, he too was just a soul searching for a place in his own skin, looking for a way to root himself in tides of fear, in seasons of confusion, in moments when trust felt thin as morning fog. This isn't a lesson about Seneca. It is an invitation to step a slow, tracing the pathway of a man who learned to gather rest not from sleep alone, but from a quieter, truer place within. Tonight, drift with me. Feel the soft edges of memory as if we are holding a lantern, breathing together in the gentle darkness, welcoming in the silent miracle of being here. Now, have you ever longed for certainty, for the hush between thoughts? A place where the soul settles like a feather landing on open palms? That's the longing Seneca once felt too. He did not come into wisdom by birth, nor did he wear spiritual armor from his first breath. He was skin and doubt, bone and question, a boy in a world of noise, his senses tangled in the hunger for something eternal. Something soft, can you feel it? The way longing drifts through time, not just his time, but yours, like a tether between spirits who never meet but always recognize each other in the dark. So let's begin gently. This isn't the story of a sage painted on a marble wall, but a soul whose journey might mirror your own. As you settle in, let your breath slow. Let your mind curl toward stillness. With each pause, let the world outside surrender its weight, just for tonight, just enough to listen. And somewhere between your waking and your sleeping, between history and this hushed present, you may find the edges of yourself softened, healed by the echoes of a man who, even in ancient Rome, learned to lie back in life and let stillness fold around him like a promise. A beginning is never silent. It arrives with the ache of wanting, the hush of waiting. So we return to a small, clay-lit room on an old Roman morning, not to facts or names, but to a young soul, sensitive as you and hungry. There is a sense, even now, that some arrivals have less to do with time than with readiness. Seneca's life began in the same way every soul story does. With longing through those first waking years, the world pressed its thumb on his spirit. There were grand homes, the velvet weight of expectations, the relentless hum of voices weaving futures for him. None belonged to his own breath. In those earliest mornings, Seneca sat in shadow, more soot than sunlight, more question than knowledge, watching the world's motion from inside a body that didn't always feel like home. He heard words, Latin and longing, floating, echoing, cutting the air like sharp wind through pines. Ambition crackled not like hope, but like a restless fire never quite contained. But it wasn't the noise of ambition that filled him. It was the silence after, when everyone else's laughter faded and only the hush of his heartbeat answered. Can you remember a moment like that? When the world seemed designed for noise, but you wanted only quiet, that was the ground from which his questions grew. Why does my heart race for something I cannot name? Why does my soul feel heavy in rooms that look so perfect from the outside? Early on, he carried the ache of those who do not fit cleanly inside their own story. Watching the light move across the marble floors, listening for meaning where none was spoken aloud. Sometimes rest comes not from ease but from the comfort of deep questions. The world expected much, a shining, sharp mind, quick with answers. Yet even while he learned to dazzle, he also learned to retreat. Behind every well-chosen word, a flicker of longing. Behind every lesson, a tiredness not of the mind but of the spirit. Seneca's feet carried him through grand halls, but his spirit drifted elsewhere, into gardens at dusk, into the quiet coolness of stone rooms where no one called his name. There he listened to wind, to the low prayers that sometimes sound like sighs, to the pulse of solitude that can fill a young soul with promise, even as it aches with confusion. Have you ever stood in a place you were supposed to love and waited for something softer to arrive? That was him then, just as it is sometimes you now. No one tells you this, but the greatest stories begin not with answers, but with a longing for rest. With a longing even for a gentle kind of loneliness Seneca lived, but more than that he felt. The difference is everything. When the world designs you for greatness, but your heart presses quietly for meaning and peace, something beautiful begins to root itself, deep, unseen, waiting. Tonight we let that longing be sacred. Tonight we let his confusion mirror our own. Tonight the story opens not with triumph, but with permission to feel lost, to want, to ache. The first spark never looks like a thunderclap. Sometimes it's just the tiniest sliver of light threading through the dark, unexpected, delicate, soft. Seneca's first spark arrived on a morning that felt like any other. He was older but not quite grown. Wise in the ways the world values, but hollowed by yearning each night. He walked early, sandals gritting against stone, breath slow-misted in the cold. The city, Rome, woke dense and restless the way all cities do. Smoke, shouting, morning chores, but Seneca slipped away seeking an edge, a quieter orbit. In a courtyard garden rimmed with cypress and wild rosemary, he found her, the old woman, sweeping the path. Her hair was moonlit silver, her gaze low. Not a noble, not a teacher, not a priestess, simply a presence. She didn't speak first. Instead, she hummed a tune that had no melody, just the shape of comfort, as if filling the morning with invitation. Seneca watched, felt the hush in her movements, a gentleness in the way she bent, the way she let her breath move her, not the other way around. He lingered, drawn by something both ordinary and sacred, an ease that seemed to wrap itself around the garden like warm air. She paused, lifted her gaze, and her eyes met his. In that gaze, a question and an answer, soft and silent. "Are you tired?" And for the first time, Seneca let himself say yes. She smiled. Not with her lips, but with her whole being, the way trees smile in strong wind, they give but never break. He did not know it then, but something shifted. Something in the way he held his own breath, in how he listened, not just to words, but to the small, soft music between them. Later she would speak about resilience, not as armor but as water, moving, yielding, shaping stone without force. She would say, "There is a place inside untouched by chaos. Find it, rest there. And when you walk back into the world, carry that silence with you." It wasn't teaching. It was an invitation to feel. Something landed in him that day, a root, not a skill or a lesson, but a permission to rest within himself. Back in the city's surge, back in his father's halls, Seneca began noticing the smallest intervals of silence, the moments the world left unguarded like gifts. He listened for hush between conversations. He found ease in the way sunlight split through olive branches, in the laughter of strangers, in the slow return of his own heartbeat after a storm. Have you ever had a moment like that? When the world offered something wordless and inside you a new door opened? Seneca's spark was not a miracle. It was simply a permission to step off the path, if only for a breath. We do not remember our first awakenings because they dazzle. We remember them because at last we let ourselves rest, even if just for a blink. But every spark lives alongside a shadow. The sacred struggle arrives quietly, the way dusk drapes itself across the garden. Seneca's hardships did not steal in as obvious enemies. They wove themselves into his daily living like thorns on the same stem as roses. He lived beneath a web of expectations. His father, sharp-tongued and shining with pride, pressed him toward greatness, toward titles, toward the games of power. Yet Seneca's spirit wilted beneath the weight of things he was meant to desire. He became sick over and over. Thin as reeds, breathless, wrung out by fevers the world could not see or name, he rested not with choice but as consequence, as punishment. Each return to health was like crawling out of a storm. Each return to the house of achievement felt colder, emptier. He would find himself silent among crowds, eyes tracing the cracks in marble, waiting for meaning to trickle back. There were days he wished the world would stop asking him for more, always more. Have you ever wished the same? Sometimes pain becomes the teacher we never wanted. The body breaks so the spirit can rest. During those hardest winters, Seneca learned the subtle art of waiting, not for storms to pass, but for his own roots to strengthen in the dark. He journaled by lamplight, filling pages not with answers, but aches and hopes and confessions he never spoke aloud. He learned the difference between stillness and stagnation. That one is alive and the other denies life. That sometimes resilience is simply the courage to do nothing, to be nobody, to make peace with uncertainty and drift. There was shame, yes, the shame of disappointing those who thought he was destined for more. There was fear that life would slip past unnoticed in the hours lost to illness. But beneath both, a slow, stubborn hope. That perhaps everything taken away was just a clearing, a space for something softer to grow. Seneca watched the way seasons made beauty out of barrenness, the way winter's branches promised spring but never rushed it. He began to see himself as part of this rhythm. He let himself mourn what he missed. He let himself ache for joy that would return when ready. Maybe it's the same for you sometimes. Maybe your hardest nights have a lesson only your spirit knows. Seneca's sacred struggle was not an accident. It was the path reshaping him in slow, brilliant ways. The turning point does not come wearing banners. It arrives the way sunrise empties darkness, one moment then the next. Seneca, in the hush of another fevered night, found himself gazing not at the ceiling, but inside, beyond bone, past memory, into the space where soul and breath nearly meet. He realized the world had never given him rest, it would never stop asking. But he could stop pleading, start witnessing, become quietly present. It struck him that rest was not a destination but a frequency, something you tune to, not travel toward. His suffering, woven with awareness, became like black soil, rich not in comfort but in possibility. He rose not with energy but with decision, to walk softly, differently. To carry stillness as a lamp in chaos, not as a prize reserved for days that never come. He began to practice surrender, not as defeat, but as a letting go of praise, of tasks, of the endless urge to fix or fight or compare. He started to greet each morning with a quiet question: what is truly required of me right now? The answer was always less, not more. From that day, Seneca crafted a life that bent around his own quiet. He learned to drop anxieties like pebbles in a river, watching the ripples fade before reaching new shores. Relationships, once wrapped in tension, softened. He stopped performing in rooms that did not nourish him. He paused more, listened. Offered more silence than speech, more presence than performance. He found himself at the center of storms, untouched, as if resilience was the art of making peace with rain rather than building bigger roofs. Can you feel it? That possibility within you, that you too could turn toward yourself, not to fix but to allow rest its place even amidst responsibility. The turning point wasn't a victory, it was a return. A re-recognition of something always inside him, inside you, waiting to be honored. Living the truth, his truth became, for Seneca, an art of rhythm. No need for drama, no reward for effort, just the slow beauty of matching inner breath to outer living. He woke early not to conquer but to savor. He wrote in lamplight, walked under cypress trees, sat in the half-light of dawn, letting the air fill lungs not for purpose but for pleasure. The city called and he learned to answer on his own terms. No longer a shadow in the room, but a whole presence, quiet but unbreakable. He counseled friends not with speeches, but with gentle questions that invited them to find their own rest. He let himself be misunderstood. He learned the deep power of enoughness. He began to repeat simple mantras: this now is sufficient. This too is part of the eternal rhythm. This too I can rest inside. He wrote letters that became holy for their honesty, words not about ideals but invitations. He became forgiveness for those who wronged him, softness for those who demanded hard edges. Resilience for him was never toughness. It was the capacity to bend, to renew, to yield without breaking. Seneca let himself be human, and in that he became uncommonly clear. Have you ever tasted that clarity? The feeling of standing fully inside your own life, free of hurry, of apology? That is what it means to truly embody your own philosophy. To live in devotion, not to an idea, but to the breath that keeps you here, right now. Seneca did not always succeed. He faltered, he forgot. He forgave himself and began again, each time softer, each time stronger. Mastery was never the goal, it was the side effect of honesty, of letting himself fall gracefully into the design of things. The others looked at him and saw power, wisdom, influence. But his true strength, the quiet, magnetic gift that made his legacy immortal, was his ability to meet discomfort with unwavering softness. Seneca met pain with presence. Where others ran, he stayed still. Where others built defenses, he opened. He learned the rare discipline of non-resistance. When criticism came, he listened. When storms rose, he became the unmoved center. He discovered that mastery looks from the outside like gentleness, but inside it's a powerful rootedness, deep and sturdy as an old tree. He watched the world chase and strive and decided instead to witness, to absorb, to find harmony with whatever arrived. The more he bent, the more he endured. The less he clung, the easier it was to recover joy. His body, once so vulnerable, became simply a vessel for experience, not an argument with fate. His mind, sharp as ever, learned the slow intelligence of patience. Seneca lived as proof that the truest mastery is being unafraid of the dark, unarmed in the face of sorrow, unhurried in the presence of chaos. And something about this way of living, slow, rhythmic, open, became a lamp for everyone lucky enough to cross his path. If you watched closely, you'd see Seneca's secrets hidden not in doctrines, but in the patterns of his living. He followed the laws of life that have no name, but can be felt everywhere. The law of letting go, the rhythm of ebb and flow, the dance between yielding and standing tall. He surrendered what wasn't his to shape. He trusted in the timing of return, believed that what comes is what's needed, and what goes is to be released. Seneca walked with invisible ropes around his heart, a willingness to be moved, to be changed, to be empty so that fullness might return. You wouldn't hear a formula in his life, only a practice, to pause and listen for the pulse beneath the noise, to welcome what is soft, to trust that sometimes doing less brings more life. Every day he practiced the alchemy of feeling both ache and gratitude. Every night he let darkness be a friend, not a punishment. He lived by the river of surrender floating with the current. He trusted rhythm, knowing what resists, persists, and what softens, survives. He did not claim greatness. He simply dwelled with relentless humility in the small laws of spirit that bind everything together. Those hidden rules, the ones you already know inside but sometimes forget, held him and now hold you. If we could have a conversation not with his words but with Seneca's soul, what would he whisper to us tonight? Perhaps first he would say, rest is not idleness, it is your ground, your right, rest as often as you ache. Then maybe resilience is not toughness, it is the soft thread that ties you lovingly back to yourself, no matter how far you roam, he might reflect. Surrender is not failure. Yielding to the rhythm of things is a kind of wisdom your body already remembers. And softer still, pause whenever you remember. Your worth is not measured by your output but by your presence. Or finally, with a small smile. Let silence be your homecoming. Let softness be your way. Do you feel it? How his story isn't just a lesson but an offering? Take it. Hold it in your pulse as you breathe tonight, as you drift. Let the quiet between these words grow like roots. Nowhere to be, nothing left to carry except the rhythm of your own living. As the night draws to its slow close, take in the hush that follows. No need to remember every word, every metaphor. Only this let the spirit of a man who learned to rest, to yield, to begin again, live just beneath your skin. Breathe in, breathe out. Carry this mantra: I too am allowed to rest. I too am tender and enduring. I too am made to return softly to myself. I too am allowed to rest. I too am tender and enduring. I too am made to return softly to myself. Repeat this inside your heart as many times as you need. Let it rewind you, restore you, let it whisper its way through every tired part of you. Each repetition, lighter, truer: I too am allowed to rest. I too am tender and enduring. I too am made to return softly to myself. Let this be your mantra, your anchor in the river of night. And as your breath slows, as your mind softens to dream, know you are already eternally enough. We are all somehow Seneca tonight, and all the world is ready for your softness. Rest easy, friend, until the morning finds you anew. There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories that change your breath. This one will change the way you walk through the world. Tonight on The Modern Mystic, we enter the quiet brilliance of the Stoics' guide Seneca on rest and resilience, not as a figure in history, but as a mirror to something ancient within you. Have you ever felt like the world was impossibly loud, or that rest was something just out of reach? Maybe there was a season when you carried weariness like a stone in your chest, wondering if the world would always rush past you. A moment when you longed for a pause deep enough to remember who you are. That's exactly what the Stoics' guide Seneca on rest and resilience once felt too. Before he became a voice echoing across centuries, before his wisdom was traced in the margins of books or quoted in conversations about strength, Seneca was just a soul learning how to live inside a restless world. There's a part of him that belongs to every person who ever wondered if peace could be found, not in perfect silence, but in turning towards the noise gently, as if meeting the wind. Tonight, we don't travel just to an ancient Rome with marble pillars and togas. We travel deeper, to the quiet room inside you where yearning and wisdom first meet. His story isn't just about what he wrote or how he spoke. It's about longing for sanctuary and building one inside your own chest. It's about walking, sometimes slow, sometimes steady, through storms, and finding a way to rest, even with lightning in the distance. Maybe there was a moment in your life when you felt restless for no reason at all. Or times when you sat awake in the middle of the night, questioning if you'd ever find a pace that felt honest. Seneca knew that ache. He lived with questions like a heart lives with its own beating. He didn't float above hardship. He walked through it, toes digging into the earth, weather shifting overhead, searching for a place to sit and breathe, even as life demanded more. And tonight, you're invited on that same pilgrimage inward, not to gather answers, but to remember the hush you already carry. Let your breath fall heavy, let your shoulders sink. Let the day drift into gentle, golden dusk, and listen as Seneca's story becomes your own. Picture a boy, eyes wide, standing at the edge of a crowded courtyard, where the dust of the city rises with the sun and questions float in the morning air. Where every column is both shelter and shadow, and a child wonders if it's possible to belong in a world that never sleeps. Seneca begins as a listener. His earliest memory isn't a triumph, it's a question: why do we hurry? Where does rest live, and how do you find strength when you feel so small? The days are long in the memory of a child. He watches his elders speak in circles, stories woven in and out of stone walls, logic rising like morning dew. But his favorite moments aren't loud, they're the still, golden ones right before sleep when the world seems to hush. Maybe you remember a moment like that, a gentle pause where you felt the world holding you without asking for anything. In those pauses, Seneca learned to notice the rhythm in things, the way silence speaks louder than a crowd, the way longing can be a teacher, not just a pain. Years drifted by, and the hunger inside him grew not just for knowledge, but for a wisdom he couldn't yet name. He felt it at the base of his throat, a quiet ache, a longing to know if peace was possible and whether it could live in a world of demands. So he listened and wandered. He watched his mother's shadow in the kitchen, the way she paused before lifting a bowl, the softness of her sighs at the window. He listened to the busy rush outside, the ancient beat of footsteps on stone, the lull between arguments, the peace between every question. Rest, he realized even then, is not just sleep. It's a place behind the eyes, a quiet note beneath the noise, a rhythm the heart can find, even when the day will not. Have you ever sat with longing and wondered if it could become your friend? Seneca was a boy with questions, and that, dear one, is where everything began. In the quiet shadow of his youth, longing became fuel. He learned, as you will too, that rest isn't found on a distant hill or hidden in someone else's voice. It lives inside you, waiting to be met with every breath, waiting to be remembered every night you lay down to dream. You feel the gentle hush settle over you. This isn't just a story about a sage, it's about finding resilience in your own bones. Welcome, let's walk slowly together into the wisdom you already carry. Let this night be a gentle beginning to something ancient and already yours. There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories that change your breath. This one will change the way you walk through the world. Tonight on The Modern Mystic, we enter the quiet brilliance of Seneca's way, not a figure carved into history books, but as a mirror softly reflecting something enduring, patient, and quietly alive in you. Have you ever wondered if calm is something you find or something you remember? Maybe you wondered, sitting alone in your car, late at night, or just after waking, if there's a way to be less at the mercy of the world, less swept up, less tangled in what you can't hold. Maybe you've felt the ache of another restless night, the weary looping of thoughts, the longing for just a little peace that doesn't fade by morning, or maybe in some small ordinary hour. You saw the world growing louder, and all you really wanted was to close your eyes, breathe slow, and remember who you are underneath the noise. That's exactly what Seneca once felt too. The Stoics' guide isn't about perfect wisdom or heroic restraint. It's the story of a man who walked through overwhelm and learned how to soften his grip when all he wanted was to hold on tighter. If you've ever wished you could rest, truly rest, even as the world spins on, if you've ever hoped for resilience that comes not from bracing but unburdening, tonight you're in the right place. So let's sit here beside the lamplight of your own soul and wander a little with a man who looked for peace and found it not just in answers but in the silence beneath the questions. Let's begin. The quiet in a Roman villa, The hush of early morning, when the city is still breathing in, the faintest golden gleam stripped across the stone. Seneca, a boy of promise and longing, grew up in a world so loud with expectation that silence itself became an act of rebellion. Even as a child, he felt it, the press of others' plans, the ambition that crept in with every measured step. But in the pauses between, in the slow evenings where the sun dropped low, he found himself listening for something deeper. It wasn't just the comfort of quiet or a fear of chaos, it was a longing to know if peace was more than a rumor. He'd lie awake, hearing his own breath, as if searching for a secret note buried underneath the music of his days. Sometimes it came to him in the garden, a hush that trickled through the olive trees, a breeze carrying more than air, almost a promise. He'd close his eyes, feeling the slow pulse of the earth. Was this presence? There were moments of confusion, 2 days when the questions grew too wide and Seneca's mind spun in restless loops. Why do we suffer? Why do some people seem unmoved while others break with every change? Young Seneca watched, quietly kept these questions like stones in his pocket. He wanted to know, could a person really rest here now just as they are? Is there a place not just in temples but inside yourself where you belong even as storms roll in? And so began a life not just of philosophy but of listening, of leaning into doubt and wondering if maybe, just maybe, our truest peace is not something we win, but something we remember, like an old friend coming home at dusk. Seneca's longing only grew as he did. The bigger the world, the wider the echo inside him. Days in study, nights awake, sometimes bold, sometimes afraid. He became a student of both logic and of silence there. In the shadowed corners of his own making, he learned that being lost is part of being alive. And beneath every restless desire is a small, steady voice asking kindly, "Can you rest now? Even before you understand?" Let's stay a while with this boy who grew to be a man. Let's pause together in that place where need becomes prayer and longing becomes a lantern that lights the dark. He was born in Cordoba under sun-bleached skies, the child of power and tradition. Yet within him a rebellion quieter than anger. He listened to the world and more so to the ache beneath his skin, the loneliness not of being alone, but of not yet being home, not yet resting inside himself. There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories whispered at night that remind you how to breathe. This is one meant for you tonight. Seneca's early days moved with a rhythm both restless and unusually attentive. He saw with wide gray eyes the dissatisfaction in others, the hunger for more, never quite sated. The men and women of his world measured themselves by gold, by power, by the fleeting approval of crowds. But every so often, Seneca would find himself lost in a beam of fading light or the hush of a distant storm. He wondered if peace was something you earned, or if it only came to those who surrendered. In his heart there was both hope and hunger, a wish to discover what no one else would say out loud. That rest is sacred, and resilience is a slow-growing root, not the sudden bloom the world celebrates. We travel onward with him now, as the night grows softer around you together, sink into the stillness between words and let the journey unfold. In the heart of his childhood, Seneca learned how it feels to be more observer than participant. Sometimes the ache of not quite fitting in becomes its own kind of guidance. He watched others play, chase, shout, and found himself drifting to the edge instead, listening to wind, tracing shapes in dust, wishing for connection but also grateful for the privacy of wonder. The longing didn't end with childhood. As he grew, so did the questions, and under layers of ritual and reason, he kept one wish alive: to know how to rest fully and without fear, no matter what waited for him when the sun rose again. So let's follow him into temples and city streets, down quiet corridors and noisy halls, not as a philosopher but as a sleeper, a seeker, a voice echoing in the dark, looking as you are for a guide back home. And as we move with him, remember, the longing to rest is not weakness, it's a doorway. Tonight you step through too. The story continues. There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories that change your breath. This one will change the way you walk through the world. Tonight on The Modern Mystic, we gently unfold the quiet brilliance of the Stoics' guide Seneca on rest and resilience. Not as a figure carved into history, not as a statue gathering dust, but as a mirror to something ancient within you. Have you ever felt a longing for stillness, even as the day spins on? Perhaps there was a moment when you wondered if peace was meant for someone else, but not quite for you. A night when sleep drifted far away, and every thought had sharp corners. Or maybe you've known the hush just before dawn, that gentle ache of wanting to come home to yourself. That's exactly what the Stoics' guide Seneca on rest and resilience once felt too. Imagine a boy under a pale, quiet sky far from the marble halls and bright echoes of Rome that would come later. There's a little hunger in him, wider than any city street, deeper than any book he'll ever hold. He sits on a low hillside, small, lost in the open hush just after rain. Breathing in, listening not only to the wind, but to the questions that seem to rise between heartbeats. Why do people chase so hard and rest so little? Why does quiet feel like both a gift and a loneliness? Are we meant to search for peace, or let it find us when we stand still? Restlessness brushes his shoulders, but there's something else too. A hope just under the ribs. Whoever you are, wherever you're listening tonight, you know this hope. The one that makes you pause before a sleeping city window. The one that calls you to gather your scattered pieces and just breathe. Seneca's life wasn't built on perfect calm or endless confidence. It bent under questions, split against heartbreak, and stretched in the long reach for meaning. He was not a monument. He was a mirror, and in that mirror we see ourselves on a quiet quest. Maybe tonight you're searching for a softer place to land. Maybe you're bone tired, or maybe you're simply here for a story that will hold you like a steady hand. This is that story. There are voices that rise and roar. Seneca's wasn't always one of them. Instead, his wisdom was the slow drip of rainwater on stone, the gentle nudge of a friend when the road grows long. He invites us into rhythm, not rush. Not to strive for an unbreakable armor, but a supple resilience, a kind of strength that bends and rests, breathing with the seasons of a whole, messy life. So let's begin here with a promise between us. Tonight you don't need to solve or carry or work so hard to be wise. You're already enough, just as the daylight softens into dusk, just as every inhale is a kind of homecoming. Let Seneca's soul story be the gentle drift in your chest and the ground beneath your dreams. We're not chasing sleep. We're welcoming it the way a river welcomes the moon. Tonight, let's remember together. The art of resting isn't a failure, it's a sacred practice. And with that, let your breath slow, let every word land soft. You are listening to the modern mystic, and this is the story you needed tonight. Some stories change your mind, this one changes your breath and invites your soul to rest. There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories that change your breath. This one will change the way you walk through the world. Tonight, on The Modern Mystic, we enter the quiet brilliance of the Stoics' guide Seneca on rest and resilience, not as a figure in history, but as a mirror to something ancient within you. Have you ever felt a hush in your chest as sleep settles, but the world behind your eyes still stirs and stirs? Maybe there was a time you lay awake, craving peace, not just in your bed, but somewhere much deeper, a moment when you longed for rest, the kind that makes your heart unclench, your breathing slow, your spirit find its place in the universe. That's exactly what this story is here to offer. What the soul of Seneca longed for and learned how to find bit by bit, breath by breath. Seneca, not as a philosopher read through dusty pages, but as a soul frail and curious as your own shining through the dark. If you close your eyes now, let the room quiet, can you feel your body already softening? The gentle pulse in your wrists. Seneca's story begins not in the marble halls of Rome, not in ceremony or thunderous speech, but in the silent wrestling matches of a young heart. The child who wondered why joy was brief, why fear was lasting, why people said tomorrow would be brighter when tonight felt endless. He didn't know answers, only longing. The ache that kept him awake, like a kind of hunger that had no name yet. Have you ever woken at midnight with questions swelling in your belly, too wide or too deep for words? Seneca did. His earliest memory was the hush after laughter, when the grown-ups had left and the night felt largely strange. How early you know that the world is both kind and uncertain. One moment, the heat of the sun on your window. The next, a shadow casting across your favorite chair. He would lie there, tiny yet infinite, staring at nothing, feeling the tremble of wind against the shutters, tracing patterns in the dust, wondering if he'd always feel so unfinished. Tonight, as your own breath softens, let his story enter you like a gentle tide. This is not a hero's tale, nor a lesson meant to be learned. This is the secret thread tying your restless moments to someone who once struggled to trust his own heart, you and Seneca sharing the same river of yearning. The same hope that maybe, if you listen softly enough, some wisdom will rise from within. So let's begin. Let go of the world's hurry. Feel yourself held safe in this tapestry of quiet souls finding their way. Once there was a boy who closed his eyes at night wishing to be less afraid of failure, of pain, of the tides of life that always pull and shift. You might call him a Stoic. But first he was simply human, just like you. Imagine for a moment you are lying there too, feeling everything and nothing all at once. The future stretching out like the horizon in twilight, both promise and impossibility. In that space, you are not alone. Let's stay here, breathe in, breathe out, listen for what comes next. He came from a place of deep questions, from the ache behind laughter, from days that blended light into shadow. Not a prodigy, not yet wise, only awake in a way children can be. Awake enough to taste longing, the way salt flavors the sea. Where does strength come from? What is rest made of? How does a spirit prepare for the world's weight? There are no quick answers, just a story unfolding. You are welcome here, exactly as you are, waiting, listening, already changing. Let yourself settle, the journey has just begun. The night is vast and your soul is cradled inside it. You are held, and so the soul biography of Seneca, the Stoic's silent guide, begins to rise, gentle as dawn. There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories that change your breath. This one will change the way you walk through the world. Tonight on The Modern Mystic, we enter the quiet brilliance of the Stoic's guide Seneca on rest and resilience, not as a figure in history, but as a mirror to something ancient within you. Have you ever felt the world pressing so close that every moment asks for more than you can give? Maybe there was a time when the city lights seemed too bright, when sleep was something you chased rather than something that found you. A moment when you longed for peace, not just the absence of noise, but the kind of quiet that feels like returning home. That's exactly what the Stoics' guide Seneca on rest and resilience once felt too. Imagine a soul who wandered old Rome, heart beating to the restless pulse of an empire, mind flickering between ambition and ache. Imagine that soul turning slowly inward. A spiral, a hush, a leaning toward a silence that only deep listening can find. Seneca was more than a name carved in old marble. He was a breathing question, a longing for meaning in an era drowning in noise, a tenderness beneath the armor of wit. Tonight, let's set aside what you've heard before about philosophy or fame. Let's let the room dim, the blankets rise, and the space between words become a companion, not an emptiness. You are not here to learn, you are here to remember. Remember what it means to unwind, to find steadiness inside the softest night. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe like you've lived 1,000 years, and just for a moment, you are allowed to be exactly as you are in the soft hollow after midnight, when Rome was sleeping and the fires cracked low. Seneca sometimes wondered what it meant to truly rest, not just to stop moving, but to cease the endless parade of worries, like leaves drifting on a stream that could never find peace. Have you ever felt you needed permission to be still? Have you ever closed your eyes and listened for an answer in the quiet between heartbeats? Tonight, the story is not about Seneca's victories or his falls. It is about the small places where his heart learned to find home. And as you listen, you might find pieces of your own longing echoing back, soft as a lantern in rain. Steady as a river at dawn, the city outside fades. Your own story meets his in the gentle dark. Isn't it strange how sometimes what we seek most is not another answer, but a permission slip, an invitation to rest, to soften, to gather ourselves like sunlight warming old stones. So let the breath slow, let the words turn, and let Seneca's journey be not a lesson, but a shared walk through the night, each step leading you not away but closer home. Here begins the Stoic's guide. Here begins the quiet beauty of rest. There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories that change your breath. This one will change the way you walk through the world. Tonight on The Modern Mystic, we enter the quiet brilliance of the Stoic's guide Seneca on rest and resilience, not as a figure in history, but as a mirror to something ancient within you. Have you ever felt the ache for gentle answers in a world that rushes? Maybe there was a time when rest seemed impossible, when the nights stretched on without comfort, or the mornings began heavy before the light even touched your room. Have you ever sat with longing, soft and unspoken, that hush before you name your want or the quiet plea you barely admit, for a life that feels lighter, clearer, steady, even as the world turns upside down? That's exactly what the Stoics' guide Seneca on rest and resilience once felt too. Long before tales or titles, there was just a boy with eyes the color of rain-swept fields. He walked Roman courtyards, traced shadows along cool stone, and listened for something beneath the chatter, a wordless note in the silence. Even then there was hunger, not for what was in his hand, for what was beneath his skin. A wanting to understand why the heart aches, why the mind spins, why peace feels so far away. Somewhere between sunlight falling on columns and the cries of market sellers greeting the dawn, young Seneca was just like any of us, searching, watching clouds drift, wondering why some people seem untouched by storms while others carry thunder inside. There must be some anchor, he thought, something strong enough to hold and soft enough not to bruise. Sometimes at dusk he would sit with his own breath, counting the ways he did not yet belong, the questions he was too young or too quiet to ask. Is there another way to live? Can you live in a world full of noise and tend the garden of your spirit in silence? His longing was not for glory, but for ground, for a place he could settle inside himself, even as the world kept spinning. Maybe you've known that longing too. Maybe you have felt the push and pull, wanting more, but wanting peace most of all. Wanting to let go, but not sure what it means to truly rest, to trust, to stay with yourself when everything else says run. That's the first truth of Seneca's quiet story. Underneath every philosophy, every poem, every idea, there's a person seeking what you seek: rest, resilience, a home inside their own soul. And tonight, as you settle into this slow hour, let Seneca's path become a soft thread winding through your night. Not as lessons, not even as wisdom, but as quiet company, as the gentle presence of someone who walked the hard roads so you could move slower and dream deeper. Let yourself inhale, let the story meet you where you are, let your heart open to the simple, sacred truth. You too are worthy of rest. You too carry resilience. Even when you feel fragile, you are in good company now, and the story that shaped Seneca is about to unfold within you. There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories that change your breath. This one will change the way you walk through the world. Tonight, on The Modern Mystic, we enter the quiet brilliance of Seneca, a soft mirror for something ancient and unfinished inside you. Not a distant figure, not a name in dusty books, but a kind of voice in the dark air calling you back toward your most restful strength. Have you ever felt there must be a gentler way? Maybe there was a season when your body was tired, but your mind kept wandering, restless, awake, thirsting for peace. A moment when you longed for calm that didn't answer to the noise of the world. That's exactly what Seneca, the Stoic guide, once felt too. He was not born wise or calm or at ease in himself. His story began with searching, with a sense that something was missing, a hunger. Close your eyes if you haven't already. let your breathing slow. Every inhale brings you deeper into the soft world behind his words. Every exhale empties out the day's weight until there's only presence, only now. Imagine a young soul, curious but silent inside. Walls around him, streets echoing with footsteps and promises. Strange how even in the middle of a city someone can feel alone, like an island in the fog. Seneca's nights were like that, long, filled with questions nobody else seemed to ask aloud. What is peace? How do I find rest, not just for the body but for the heart? It's in those quiet hungers that a different kind of story begins. Not the story of victory or greatness or outer achievement, but the story of coming home to yourself, piece by piece, breath by breath. Seneca did not arrive all at once. He wandered, doubted, listened. He felt the ache of wanting to belong to something deeper, the discomfort of being judged, of watching others rush, succeed, stumble, collapse, and wondering, is that all there is? Tonight you are invited to walk slower, to listen between the lines. Seneca's life, his real life, wasn't lived in bright rooms or crowded halls or on the stage of history. It was lived in the hush before dawn, in the lonely hours when the world forgets you. Maybe you know that place. Maybe you've stood at the edge of sleep and thought there must be more, or I wish my heart could finally rest. This is for you. Let his story be yours for tonight, just as you are. No pressure to change, no task to finish. No exams, no critics, no audience. Only you, receiving the gentle wind of another soul's journey and sensing, somewhere inside, your own spirit beginning to soften, to settle, to remember. Seneca's gift was not about never breaking, never stumbling. It was about returning again and again to a center that cannot be touched by noise or fear. A willingness to walk through the uneasy silence until peace becomes a living, breathing friend. So let's begin there where all true things begin, in the long hush between your questions, in the gentle half-light between dreaming and waking. Seneca's path opens before you and beside his, yours, a little closer to home with every breath. There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories that change your breath. This one will change the way you walk through the world. Tonight on The Modern Mystic, we enter the quiet brilliance of the Stoics' guide, Seneca, on rest and resilience. Not as a figure in history, but as a mirror to something ancient within you. There's a kind of wisdom that doesn't speak loudly, a hush that threads through your thoughts. Especially at night, maybe you've felt it just before sleep, or in those moments when the world falls away and you realize you are both heavy and free. Have you ever felt the ache of carrying too much? Thoughts, worries, the weight of someone else's silence? Have you felt as if rest was just another word floating out of reach, somewhere between your heart and the edge of a distant horizon? Maybe there was a time when morning came before you were ready, your bones tired, your hope stretching awake, trying to remember what renewal should feel like. A moment when you longed for peace and not the absence of noise, but the kind of deep, unshakable calm that can hold you even as the world keeps spinning. The certainty that you can return to yourself, softly and wholly, no matter what life is asking of you. That's exactly what the Stoics' guide, Seneca on rest and resilience, once felt too. You might think of Seneca as an old philosopher, wrapped in robes, sitting beneath marble pillars. But under all that history, there was a person alive, human, breathing in the same moonlight we see now. A soul who knew the pressure of expectations and the sting of uncertainty, a heart that wrestled, sometimes quietly, sometimes with storm and fire, against the currents of fate and the restless mind. Before he was an icon of wisdom, he was simply a boy with questions, with dreams that tangled around sleep, with fears that spoke too loudly after midnight, with a kind of longing that never quite left him, even as his face grew older and his name grew heavy with stories. Tonight we let the centuries dissolve. We step inside Seneca's solitude, into that flickering space where lessons are whispered, not shouted. There the world becomes softer and the self becomes clearer. This is not the story of a statue, but of a seeker. One who saw inside himself and found rest not as an escape, but as an art. You are here, too, listening not to a lecture, but to the slow unfolding of a life that might hold secrets for you. Not every night brings perfect quiet, but every night brings the chance to begin again. Tonight, let the story be your pause, let the wisdom be your breath. Let your heart rest where it is, without having to fix, to earn, to solve. Let yourself drift with the current of Seneca's longing. Let yourself remember that, just maybe, everything you need to return to yourself is right here, waiting beneath the stillness of your own beautiful mind. There are stories that change your mind, and there are stories that change your breath. This one will change the way you walk through the world. Tonight on The Modern Mystic, we enter the quiet brilliance of the Stoics' guide Seneca on rest and resilience, not as a figure in history, but as a mirror to something ancient within you. Have you ever felt, maybe just for a moment, like the world spun faster than you could breathe? A flicker of longing, a hush in your chest, a hope for something deeper, even as everything outside rushes past. Maybe there was a time when you woke in the quiet hours, and all you wanted was a gentler world, or a way to sit in your own life without shrinking or running, a moment when you wondered if peace was real, or just something whispered by stars to those who sleep. That's exactly what the Stoics' guide Seneca on rest and resilience once felt too. His story isn't about being a sage or a senator or a philosopher frozen by marble memory. It's about being a person, strange, restless, open, and searching. Imagine him in the long hush before morning, eyes tracing the lines of shadow across his ceiling. He longed for something softer, some river beneath all the noise, a current that could steady him. Even when nights stretched long and empty, his soul, like yours, sometimes ached for home, not the place he slept, but a belonging inside, the kind you can't name, only feel when you sit quietly with yourself. Let's drift with Seneca, not as listeners, but as travelers beside him, step into his longing, his silent hours, the candlelit ache for a life at peace with itself. He began unremarkably, born into a world of clamor where the wind carried rules instead of stories. Beneath every lesson, every should, was a hush, a breath waiting for him to hear it. He was a boy who listened to the sweep of wind through city streets, whose gaze lingered on the space between words at his family's table. Even then, before wisdom made a home in his chest, he wondered, is there more? Something that belongs to me, even as the world pulls me onward. His days were filled with learning, but it was the silence that shaped him. You see, there is a silence that isn't empty. There is a quiet that hums with questions, raw, golden, and wide as the dusk sky. Underneath teachings and tasks, Seneca's spirit stirred. There were nights when confusion settled heavy, when nothing made sense except the steady pulse of his own longing. He was surrounded by voices telling him how to speak, how to be, how to disappear inside someone else's vision. But in the quiet, he felt his own outline, not yet formed but undeniably real. That ache you sometimes feel, the desire for something you can't quite name, he knew it too, and in a world that loved noise, Seneca yearned for rest. For the kind of rest not found in sleep, but in a heart untroubled by worry. Maybe you've felt it, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, unsure where your soul ends and the night begins. In that place Seneca lingered, day after day, a question after question. Maybe he thought, just maybe, the deepest wisdom was found waiting in the hush. But change always comes quietly at first, like rain long before the clouds. One morning, before the world had quite awakened, Seneca paused at the threshold of his own heart. He realized longing was a doorway, not a wound. His questions were invitations, not punishments. And that shift, subtle as the glow that pools before sunrise, became his first spark. He saw suddenly that rest was not an escape, but a strength, a quiet resistance to chaos. He began to walk slower, listen deeper. Each step became an act of devotion to presence. Each breath, a silent vow to meet the world with less hurry and more wonder. It was not easy. Hardship has a way of arriving just as you find your footing. Seneca's struggle did not come with thunder or fury. It arrived as a slow unraveling, the kind of ache that settles in the bones. The people expected much from him: perfection, performance, answers. And inside he wrestled with doubt, fear that he could never be quiet enough to belong to himself. He learned painfully that even as the outer world praised him, his inner world could collapse. There were betrayals, disappointments, moments when life itself seemed to say, "You will not find peace." But in the tender dark, Seneca would close his eyes and name the gifts inside each ache. "I am here, I am still alive. This breath is mine." Night after night, these small acts rewrote the story his fears told, and then one day something changed. As if the earth itself had paused to exhale, Seneca felt a moment split in two. Before, where his worth was bound to the world's opinion; after, where he saw himself as part of the world, not its servant. He stood by an open window, breathing in a soft dawn. He realized he could let go just a little of the grip he kept on outcomes, on certainty, on the myth of perfection. This was his turning point, not a dramatic triumph, but a gentle permission to rest in not knowing, to let his soul be unfinished, unguarded, beautifully incomplete. From then on, he walked slowly through each day. He tended quietly to his work, letting each task be sacred on its own, no need for reward or applause. His truth became simple: to show up, offer what you can, and trust life to meet you halfway. People would watch Seneca and wonder how he moved with such